Hello. I'm your host, Chloe. Today I will be talking about The Testing, written by Joelle Charbonneau. As always, the full-length episodes such as this one include spoilers. If you would like to listen to a spoiler-free mini episode on this book, simply click episode 1A, The Testing. In this episode, I will be discussing Sia's character traits and morality, the revitalization efforts of the United Commonwealth, the structure of the testing, the misuse of the keep your friends close and your enemies closer trope, and the questionable and unlikely allies of Michael Gallen and the man on the other side of the fence. Let's talk about lit. Something that I found refreshing about The Testing is its protagonist, Sia. Sia possesses steadfast morals and fundamental beliefs. Unlike many other YA characters, Sia is someone who has a defined and consistent moral code that she uses to guide herself through the challenges that she faces. This is largely due to her being raised in Five Lakes, which she continuously credits for community-focused attitudes and empathy. I want to discuss a few examples of her character that stuck out to me while I was reading. On page 42, Sia's father tells her that some girls in his testing class liked to sabotage other candidates by poisoning them. Sia is shocked and thinks to herself, I can't think of a single student in the Five Lakes Colony School who would sabotage a fellow student in order to get a better grade. None of us are rich, but no one I know is starving either. Not anymore. If a family is struggling in Five Lakes, the rest of the community pitches in to help. A world where you might poison the competition in order to feed your family is inconceivable to me. This gives us insight into the culture of Five Lakes, the principles of which have been imprinted onto Sia. She could not think of others sinking to the level of sabotage, let alone sinking to such a level herself. Despite the unknown challenges ahead of her, she refuses to sacrifice the success of others in order to put herself ahead. On page 66, when Sia and the other Five Lakes candidates are in the dining hall for their first meal in the testing center, she observes the other candidates around her. I take a roll filled with raisins and nuts, a small piece of salmon, an apple, and some of the carrots. Just what I can eat. But I can see other candidates do not follow that same rule. Many have more than one plate in front of them piled with food. Some are taking a taste of one thing, then pushing it away in favor of something better. My father taught me to respect the food we grow and the neighbors we share our food sources with. The idea of blatantly wasting what has taken years to make, grow, and thrive makes me lose my appetite. Again, this provides us with insight into the culture of Five Lakes and its principles. Sia is not someone to take more than what she needs, and she comes from a culture that works to ensure all people have help when they need it. She does not take resources or help for granted. She also respects the property and resources of others, such as the wire that Will finds on page 221. She tells him, you found the wire, you should have control of it. It is not that she does not desire such resources, but that she respects they do not belong to her and she has no right to take them. On page 67, another candidate trips Malachi and causes him to spill his plate. Sia has an emotional response to the humiliation that Malachi experiences. My family is close and encourages discussion to resolve differences. But I have 4 older brothers. When pushed, I know how to fight. I'm ready to do so now. This reveals 2 things. 1, Sia has been raised to resolve issues peacefully. And 2, she's capable of defending herself and others if the situation escalates. Even though this instance with Malachi upset her, she does not act on her emotions. She collects herself, with encouragement from Thomas, and takes her seat. This holds true for the remainder of the novel. When possible, Sia resolves situations through discussion or by removing herself. When she is faced with a situation that requires her to act, she does the best she can to defend herself or make an escape. I like her level-headed resolve, and I think that for this novel, it's a very valuable trait. On page 70, Rhyme and Sia are conversing about their colonies and their lives. Rhyme says the compensation money her family will receive is going to be used for more farming and food storage equipment. Both will add to the food resources for her family and those around them. Rhyme sounds proud to have a hand in providing things to her community. Even though I planned on keeping my distance from candidates from outside of my colony, I find myself liking her. Sia herself has contributed to meaningful projects for the betterment of her colony, including the wind and solar generators that were used by their school. Her family, guided by her father, helped revitalize the land of 5 Lakes so it could yield crops and support the population. She has a history of making such contributions to help society, so it comes as no surprise that she continues to help others throughout the novel. To name a few things, she told Brick that she believed Roman had betrayed them, which ended up saving Brick's life. She buried a testing candidate that she did not know. She shares supplies with Thomas. She suggests offering food and company to Traceland, Stacia, and Vic, who were starving. She uses her resources to tend to the injuries of both Thomas and Will, and she puts her life and potential of success in jeopardy to save Thomas's life. One of the more subtle yet meaningful moments occurred on page 85, beginning with a conversation between Sia and Thomas. Silverware clanks against china. People are laughing and talking louder and louder to be heard over the din. Everyone is either bragging about their intellectual prowess or steeped in misery. No one is listening to us. I decide to be honest. I didn't answer all the questions. I ran out of time. As the rest of their friends arrive, Sia volunteers this information again. What I loved about this simple moment is not only Sia's honesty, but her humility. She could have chosen to lie or say nothing, but instead, she's honest about what she believes to be failure. The responses from her friends are all the same: gratitude and relief. This move also brings Will and Gil to their table, signaling the start of 2 additional friendships. People admire Sia's ability to maintain honesty, even if it is to the detriment of her reputation or perceived worth as a candidate. I think Sia summarizes it pretty well on page 192 when she says, "There are candidates out there willing to shoot, to kill, to get a passing grade on this test no matter the cost. But we are not like them." I would just like to briefly touch on the revitalization efforts of the United Commonwealth. Whenever a book is, at its core, about a system or annual event that occurs in the world, it's very important that the system that has been implemented makes sense. For this novel, the question is, why was the testing created? It was created to test, do you see what I did there? The abilities of the youth of the new nation. The 7 Stages War, which consisted of 4 stages of man-made destruction and 3 stages of destruction wrought by the earth, decimated the United States. The United Commonwealth, which rose from its remains, would not be able to survive without prioritizing the revitalization of the nation's land and resources. Because of this, the mission of revitalization must take precedence over all other pursuits. The youth, who will soon face this harsh new world, must be capable of not only surviving it, but improving it. The fate of the entire population of the United Commonwealth relies on the success of its current leaders and its future ones. I think that this all is successfully reflected in each of the challenges of the testing. Speaking of the testing and its challenges, I want to break it down into some of its successful characteristics. One characteristic of the testing that I thought added an interesting dynamic was the possibility but not the guarantee of death. From a writing standpoint, I think that this decision was made to raise the stakes and create conflict. If the characters knew going in that they would make it out alive and potentially unscathed, there would be little to no room to raise the stakes for the reader. What action could take place if they were all going to remain alive? Instead, the characters enter the testing with an unclear idea of what could happen to them. They don't think that the government would callously punish or kill them for a wrong answer or a mistake. They are the future of the United Commonwealth, after all. The discovery of Rhyme's body begins to increase the stakes as it reveals the true intentions of the testing. On page 94, Dr. Barnes says himself, "Rhyme took her own life. While this is a tragedy, it is better for the entire Commonwealth population to learn now that she is not capable of dealing with the kinds of pressure she would be forced to deal with in the future. This event is unfortunate, but the testing served its purpose." This is a turning point in the novel because Sia, as well as the readers, now realize that the testing officials do not give pause for the death of a candidate. At that point, they were only in the first round, written exams. What then could happen to them in the remaining 3 rounds? With Malachi's unexpected death at the start of chapter 8, the picture becomes clear. On page 112, Sia is faced with a disturbing realization. "From their posture, I can tell they will offer no aid. This is the penalty for an incorrect answer. To them he has earned whatever comes next." As the remaining candidates progress through the subsequent tests, it becomes abundantly clear that their lives do not hold as much value as a correct answer. The testing officials believe that such sacrifices are justified as they prevent failure in the future. But isn't failure a part of what makes us human? Mustn't we sometimes fail before we can succeed? Eradicating room for failure sets up unrealistic, even impossible, expectations. Surviving the 4th stage is made even more difficult by the looming threat of other candidates choosing to kill their competition. On page 145, Michael says, "Every year, there are testing candidates who think taking out their competition is the best way to ensure their entrance to the university. More often than not, they are right. Don't let them be this time." This raised the stakes tenfold for me as a reader. As I entered the final segment of the book alongside Sia, I was unsure if the remaining introduced characters would survive. Traversing the scarred wasteland is stressful enough without quarrels flying at your head. A second characteristic of the testing that I thought added an interesting dynamic to the story was the incredibly small graduating class. According to Sia's father on pages 30 and 31, only 71 candidates were selected for his testing, and only 16 candidates, including him, were passed on to the university from his class. On page 68, Dr. Barnes gives us the initial number of candidates in Sia's class, 108. Later, on page 318, it is revealed that only 20 candidates from Sia's class were chosen to continue on to the university. On one hand, I find this problematic. How is it that the testing can consistently produce a small graduating class, the members of which will be the only upcoming doctors, teachers, engineers, etc., but still support the growing population size of the entirety of the United Commonwealth? There is an additional factor that comes into play in the second book. Listen to the next episode. But for the sake of this first installment, let's just say that this is the only number that we have. If there are, on average, only 20 university students in each class, which are unevenly distributed between the 5 fields of study, how is it that there are enough graduates to support a national population of hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions? Let me put this into perspective. In 2018, there were 20 million people enrolled in universities across the US, both public and private. While the actual population of the United States is much, much larger than the population of the fictional United Commonwealth, I still feel that 20 candidates is far too few. I think that this system should be further tiered to provide skilled, but not the most skilled, jobs to the candidates who fail. Personally, I think that this would have been a more realistic choice. The mention of the graduating class brings me to the third characteristic of the testing that I thought added an interesting dynamic to the overall story: memory wipes. We are first introduced to this idea on page 31 when Sia's father is recounting his experiences as a testing candidate. The experiences that he can remember, that is. He says, "The head of the testing committee said testing memories are wiped clean after the process is complete to ensure confidentiality." This can be interpreted in numerous ways. It could be to keep strategies or answers to the tests confidential. It could be a way to ensure an even playing field for the following year's candidates. It could be to ensure the confidentiality of the experiences of all the testing candidates for the sake of their privacy. Or it could serve a much darker, deeper purpose. Such is the way of dystopian novels. We can infer that testing candidates who become university students have their memories erased to keep the horrors of the testing out of the public eye. This comes to the forefront in the second and third books, just so you know. This is how the testing officials are allowed to continue their monstrous methods of evaluating candidates for the university. I have mixed feelings about this choice. On one hand, I think it's a cop-out. It allowed Charbonneau to do whatever she pleased to the characters without the trauma or societal implications. On the other hand, I do think that this choice was creative, and it added an additional layer to the corruption of the government. Regardless, I will say that it is extremely annoying to have a convenient event happen to the protagonist that causes them to forget almost everything that has happened since page 1. I'm looking at you, Becca Fitzpatrick. Speaking of annoying, who doesn't love a good trope? When the first line in the cover description is, "Keep your friends close and your enemies closer," you develop an expectation that this trope is going to be prevalent in the novel. And it is, in some ways. I feel that this trope either should not have been in the base description, or it should have actually had implications in the novel. The morning of Sia's departure to Tosu City brings a foreboding message from her father. The two of them say goodbye on page 46. "My father tells me he loves me and reminds me in one last whisper, 'Sia, trust no one.'" And that lasted a whole 10 pages. On page 57, Thomas tells Sia she can trust him. She internally weighs out the options before ultimately deciding that she can. On one hand, I agree with her decision. She has known him since they were children, and this is possibly the last opportunity to divulge information before they are placed under total surveillance. From a writing standpoint, I understand the need to have at least one supporting character that is in the loop with the protagonist. It would be difficult for Sia to navigate the unknown with no one to trust, and readers may lose interest. Ultimately, I think that this was a now or never scenario, and if she didn't take this opportunity to tell Thomas her suspicions while they knew that they weren't being watched or listened to, she may not have that opportunity again. And between the other Five Lakes candidates and Michael, Thomas would be the option that would make the most sense. So I can understand and sympathize with why she chose to trust him and to tell him, but at the same time, I don't feel that Thomas has really done anything to earn her trust. At this point, they haven't faced any tests or situations where Thomas's actions could merit her trust. I feel that this was, at heart, an impulsive decision that was made because Thomas is handsome and they have mutual romantic interest in each other. Ooh. Personally, I think that it would have been more interesting to have the dynamic of trust between Sia and Thomas develop with the story. Have moments of doubt and frustration that their trust is out of survival and not out of choice. Then, gradually have them feel secure and confident in each other. An absolutely beautiful example of this dynamic is the one between Katniss and Peeta in the Hunger Games trilogy. Don't worry, I'll be getting to that one later. If this would have been the direction of Sia and Thomas's relationship, this trope could have applied, especially following the mysterious incident that leaves Thomas's blade covered in blood. I would actually argue that none of the characters fit into this trope. I'm not entirely sure why it is included in the description at all. If I were to pick a character from the novel that best fits this trope, it would be Will, but from Thomas's perspective, not Sia's. See, for this trope to work, the situation has to look something like this. There is someone that you suspect of ulterior motives. Because of your suspicions, you consider this person your enemy. Because this person is your enemy, you keep them close or closer to keep an eye on them and what they are doing. Sia is not suspicious of Will and does not consider him an enemy. She does not see his ulterior motives until he reveals them in the last stretch of the book. Thomas, on the other hand, is suspicious of Will. My question is he suspicious of Will because he thinks that he has ulterior motives? Or is he suspicious of Will because he's jealous of another male vying for Sia's attention? Regardless of his motivation, he does not consider Will an enemy. I think that Thomas is unhappy with the idea that one of their friends, especially a male friend, joined his and Sia's secret alliance, which would explain why he urged Will to leave at every chance he had. If Thomas considered Will his enemy, he would have made sure that Will did not leave his sight, where he could be doing who knows what. He would have maintained an inconspicuous rapport with Will in order to observe what he was doing and intervene if necessary. I believe that the reveal with Will would have made more sense had Sia and Thomas been suspicious of him and taken precautions, as opposed to having him be a friend who offers aid and even saves their lives right before revealing he wants to kill them. It was a choice that didn't necessarily make a lot of sense to me. In a book where you don't know who to trust, other than your handsome childhood friend, you'd be surprised to find yourself making unlikely allies. A testing official, for example, and a scraggly man with secret supplies. What are Michael's motivations? Why does he offer advice and a helping hand? Are there really insurgents inside the government and out that want to end the testing? And the man, what are his motivations? How does he have something that diminishes the truth serum's effects? How does he know so much about the testing process? The answers to these questions and more will begin to fall into place in the next 2 installments of this series. More twists, turns, and truths await us at the turn of every page. There you have it, my thoughts on Joelle Charbonneau's The Testing. Join me next time for episodes 2A and 2B, Independent Study. Let's talk about lit. Thanks for listening.